and welcome to the Scroll Sanity Podcast. I'm Carmela Giel.
And I am Nick DeBella. And thank you all so much for listening to our second episode of the Scroll Sanity Podcast. First, a very quick thank you to everybody who listened to the first episode. We had over 100 downloads in our first week, which may not sound like a lot, but when Carmela and I started this podcast, we didn't know if anyone would be listening. So it's been really great to get feedback from friends, from strangers, from people I personally haven't heard from in years saying they're interested in exploring this idea of the digital minimalism journey and maybe moving away from the smartphone. Let's jump right in, Carmela, to our flows and friction segment. Today, we're going to do something a little more fun called This Moment Brought to You by Your Dumb Phone. So I'd love to hear from you if you've had any experiences in the last week or two that either positive or negative were brought to you by your dumb phone.
Yeah, so I've been traveling a lot this week, and that means that I've been out of my routine, and I've also been relying on my smartphone a lot to do certain digital tasks on the go, like finding directions or getting an Uber. But I started noticing what a slippery slope it was because once I started using my iPhone more, it was hard to stop. For example, like I'll take photos of my kids and then I want to send them to my family. And then I start scrolling through the podcast app and then I start checking my email. And pretty soon I realized that I was quickly becoming lost in my smartphone again. And I was reaching for it a lot more often. And so several times during my travels, I've had to ask myself, why? What am I doing? Why am I picking up my phone, my smartphone? And is this in line with the relationship I want to have with it? And so I think it's just old habits die hard. And it is really hard to maintain a healthy relationship with the iPhone if I am using it in any capacity. And so I tried to stay mindful and intentional about where I was putting my attention. And I tried to shut it down and just, turn power down the smartphone if I started noticing that I was getting a little too handsy with the smartphone, or just, putting it away and maybe using my husband's phone to take photos or whatever.
All right, so this one's brought to you by Carmela's smartphone. For me, the moment brought to you by my dumb phone. It was a stressful one this week. In my full-time job, I was driving into the office and I got a call from a radio station that wanted to speak to a client of mine. I'm in the media relations world, so it's not uncommon for people I work with to be interviewed either on radio, podcasts, newspapers. And it was a, hey, this has to happen now type thing. And typically back in the smartphone era, I would have used my phone, maybe, I hate to say it, while driving, checking my email, dealing with talking points, things that I would have been able to do from my phone. And I was definitely stressed out behind the wheel, knowing I was missing emails and things that had been coming in that morning. But I took a deep breath. I pulled into a coffee shop that was nearby and I took out my laptop and managed to get it done. But it was definitely a reminder of, we talked on the last episode about FOMO. What are we missing out on when we don't have our phones? This was the first time that I had a moment like that did feel, quote unquote, important. And so it was a stark reminder that, there is a trade-off when making this journey into the world of digital minimalism, that things will not always be right at your fingertips. But again, I found a solve for it that was probably safer than what I would have done otherwise. So I'm grateful that there's still ways to connect to the world I need to. I just can't do it from the device that's in my hand. So it's an important reminder there. And then Carmela, I'm going to turn it over to you because we have something really exciting today. We have our first interview for the Scroll Sanity podcast. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about what we're doing today?
Sure. So today we have Jose Briones on the podcast. So thank you so much, Jose, for being here on the podcast with us. And Jose is the creator of the Moving Offline newsletter on Substack. And he has recently written the book called Low Tech Life. He has a successful YouTube channel of dumb phone reviews, and he's created the digital tool, the Dumb Phone Finder, as well as building a forum for dumb phone users. So thank you so much, Jose, for being on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about digital minimalism with you guys.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Jose. As before we started, I was fanning out on you a little bit. I think it's amazing all you've done in the digital minimalism movement. Carmela and I, certainly with the podcast, are fairly new to the game. Carmela's newsletter, the Scroll Sanity newsletter on Substack, has been around longer than the podcast, but I think you've been in the space a bit longer than we have. I think you made the switch to the dumb phone about 4 years ago. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I was in Georgia at the time working. I work with nonprofits, churches, different organizations. And my screen time was you know, going out of control. I had just gotten out of university, so I had finished my master's, and I had my first big job. So I had a lot of downtime
Mm.
because I wasn't going to school anymore and I didn't have that structure. And a lot of that downtime got filled with digital sources of entertainment. So that's something that I had to overcome. And I decided to start trying out different methods. And that's when I switched to the light phone.
Awesome. So, what do you think that making the switch to the dumb phone was easier or harder than you expected?
So I am from Nicaragua. I was born there and raised there. And I grew up with technology, but not with a ton of access to it. The
Mhm.
reason is that it's expensive, right? So outside of the United States, people do not earn in dollars. And a lot of the tech products that were coming out at the time were definitely, priced in dollars. So for 15 years, I grew up there and I didn't have that access. We did have access to some technology. So I used a flip phone, used a lot of, basic phones during that time. Now, when I switched about 4 years ago, I thought that it was going to be just like very easy because, hey, I've done it before. But the reality is that I had switch environments. I had a completely different understanding of the world. And as a result, had to do something completely different. So I had more friction because I was used to email all the time. I was used to watching Netflix shows even on the car. Again,
Right.
I'm not immune to the vulnerabilities and bad decisions that I was making back then. So yeah, of course, it was very difficult. It was definitely harder than I expected because I did not anticipate so many friction points in the 21st century with all the smartphones. But I think it's because I was used to a completely different environment. I had been using smartphones for about 10 years at that point in time. So I was used to the convenience. So letting go of that convenience is hard in the beginning, and you had to retrain yourself to find alternatives and to commit to that lifestyle.
Absolutely. And Jose, so much of what you do in your book Low Tech Life and through your newsletter is, share advice and opportunities for folks who may be interested in starting that dumb phone journey. But for our listeners here, what advice do you have for someone who's looking to start out on that journey?
So I think that the first advice that I have and the first idea that I have is that you have to look at the vision of your life. Don't think of it as a detox. Don't think of it as a short program. Think of it as hey, what do I want my life to look like? If I put a calendar, a monthly calendar, right, or a weekly calendar in front of me, how do I want to fill buckets in this calendar that make me have a satisfying life? Let it be work, let it be downtime, let it be friends or family, let it be sports, let it be, I don't know, taking a class for pottery or art
Hmm.
or whatever you're interested into. How do you want to fill those buckets? And then you're going to start designing after that a life that actually supports maybe a dumbed down smartphone or a full flip phone or, something that is in between. Like Carmela mentioned, and myself as well, when I go on trips, I also do the same thing. I take a smartphone with me if I go internationally because it's completely a tool. It's very helpful, especially if I don't speak the language. If I do speak the language, I will still take a dumb phone with me, maybe a tablet or my laptop. But I understand smartphones have a lot of value, but it's kind of like, how am I going to integrate technology in my life so that it helps me do the things that I want to do instead of giving me defaults that just take my time and attention and do not actually give me satisfaction.
Right.
Right. And something you've shared with your followers is that you've struggled with a porn addiction. So I was curious, how did that experience impact your relationship to technology and maybe your decision to move towards digital minimalism?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people have had experiences of suffered, addiction of some sort in the past. And
Mm.
I don't want to talk about addiction from a clinical perspective, but more of like regulation perspective, not like a government regulation, but more like how is it regulates your emotions and dependencies. So
Mm.
all of us have things in our lives that we struggle with that maybe take too much of our time and attention and our life satisfaction, things that we're dependent on maybe a little too much. So yeah, I shared before in the past, I used to consume a lot of adult content. And I think it was for multiple reasons. But I think one of them was that I wanted to have something intimate, right? But I use digital sources instead of human sources for intimacy. And that's sometimes hard to process, right? Because people are like, well, there's no intimacy in the digital world. But that's not true. There's a reason why people keep going on TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, or whatever other source of messaging platform. It's because they want to connect with other people.
Right.
And sometimes you connect with, I don't want to say the wrong sources, but I want to say sources that may be exploiting your attention and time. And adult content was one of those for me. At one point in time, I was, engaging in that practice of watching that content a little bit more than I think it's healthy for any individual. And, I think that at the time, that kind of translated to technology as well, right? So I had a history of addiction before during my early teens. And then, like, I just transferred that dependency to my smartphone. And then I felt like my smartphone was giving me intimacy because it connected me with my friends and family. It gave me things that I loved, like entertainment and watching, allowed my life to be very convenient. And of course, that again, that translation of dependency was present in my life. And then I started to work in a different area in order to shape my life in a different route so that I wouldn't be dependent on this item anymore.
Wow. Yeah, Jose, first of all, thank you for you sharing that and your vulnerability and being so open with your audience about that. Because I think that's something that I think a lot of people would kind of hold in a secret shame and not look for solutions or be willing to share with other people. And I think, Carmela and I talked last week on the podcast, both as parents, that we have children in our lives. And when you think about something like adult content and the ease of access that comes with that nowadays, especially with kids who have smartphones, not only the dangers of whether it's predatory behavior from other people, but just the fact that the dialogue around those things used to be, homegrown and maybe a little more slow rolled. Kids have access to things in a way that is a massive paradigm shift that I don't know if the parenting world was really ready for. So I think it raises a lot of really important questions around how do we deal with this ease of access and the fact that, kids are probably learning things from the internet and maybe building intimacy for the first time using the internet. That's a totally new thing for us, right? So that I think is important for everybody to be focusing on.
Definitely.
Switching gears a little bit here, Jose, talking about the tech, which is the stuff that I love. I was saying to you before we jumped on. I'm curious, in the 4 years that you've been not only a dumb phone user, but building, your brand around the digital minimalism movement, what trends or shifts have you seen in people's attitudes towards technology use? I know just in the few months that I've been in the digital minimalism movement, I'm starting to see it in more places. I'm seeing even in pop culture references from whether it's creative folks or people in the business world saying, wow, the technology that's in my life comes with a really big trade-off for that convenience. And a lot of times that's, personal attention spans or productivity or that kind of thing. I'm curious from your side over the last 4 years, what shifts have you seen in people's attitudes toward technology?
I think people were not aware of how much time they were spending on their smartphones until the pandemic hit. And then it was completely digital. Everything was digital, right? Communication was digital. We were confronted with this reality that we were using technology a lot of time for work and for personal connection because we couldn't be in local spaces actually living and breathing with other human beings. So I think as a result, the attitude shifted from a, hey, I'm just using my phone to why am I using my phone so much? And also the reality of digital fatigue. A lot of people started to get fatigued out of, man, I have to be online for my family. I have to be online for my work. I have to be online for my hobbies. I have to be online for the concert that I wanted to go to because now everything is locked down. So as a result, I think people started to realize that there was something missing in their lifestyle, something that wasn't as helpful, as beautiful. And they started to realize that, hey, maybe I need to reconsider how I engage with my technology nowadays. There's still a lot of segment of the population that doesn't think about that. And that's just because it's the default.
Mm.
The default is to use technology. The default is to use technology to
Right.
do whatever it is that you need to do. We're using technology right now. It's the default. It used to be the default that I would fly in to wherever you guys are. We will all record in a studio, but now the default has changed. And because the default has changed, most people just embrace it without really thinking about what is happening in their lives.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, it's so true. As as folks might be looking into the digital minimalism movement and maybe looking to make a hardware switch from a smartphone, do you have the kind of top 1 to 3 dumb phones you recommend, or maybe the ones you use most often? If folks reach out to you to say, "Hey, what phone should I get?" Do you have kind of a go-to suggestion there?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think about this from different terms, but I think what people really need to recognize is that everybody has different needs and different dumb phones are going to appeal to different people. I think that I'm going to give you the 3 categories and my top picks for those. So, if all you're looking to do is to reduce your smartphone use, and there's a definite need for your work, for your ideas, and for whatever it is, you need a smartphone. Let's just assume that you need a smartphone. Then I recommend something like getbrick.app, which is like an app that essentially blocks everything else.
Hmm.
You tap it, you tap it as an NFC thing with your smart device, and then after that, you block everything. If you feel like you don't have the self control to do that, then you can go a step above and set up parental controls. Similarly, on Android, let's say you have an Android, you maybe use unplug, which is, kind of like an idea where you tap as well, and then, it blocks all of your things. And after that, you can go about your day, or you can also restrict it with, more understanding a little bit more of the technology. So that's like, hey, you need a smartphone for whatever reason, you cannot get away from it, maybe it's a health reason or whatever. Well, Brick or other hacks can help you in that regard. Now, let's say that you want something in the middle. Hey, I want a smartphone, but I want it to be really difficult to access. Then something like the Jelly, it's a mini smartphone. It's like I think 3 inches, so it's super small. You're not going to be very tempted to scroll on that. Or the Cat S22 Flip, which is entering more into the proper dumb phone space, which is a flip phone, but it still has access to apps. But because it's so slow and heavy and it has a flip app, then, you know, you're not going to be tempted to use it. Finally, if you want your lives to completely change and you want to embrace a lot of the benefits of friction, then the Light Phone 2 or the Sunbeam F1 are my top choices. Those are the ones I actually use on my daily basis. I use the Light Phone 2 as my personal device, and I use the Sunbeam F1 Pro as my work device. So I text and I do all of that for work, for my life on those 2 devices.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, you're the guy to talk to about this. So
I actually have a tech question because I also have, I don't know if you have family still abroad, but I do have a lot of family abroad. And that was actually one of the main things that was stopping me from making the switch because I communicate with them all the time via WhatsApp and making calls and video calls to family, etc. We also travel a lot internationally, and I haven't yet traveled internationally with my new dumb phone. And obviously, I won't be able to use that internationally. So I'm curious, how do you manage those kinds of aspects? And also, as somebody who is bilingual, like Spanish speaker, the texting, the voice to text doesn't work in Spanish. It's been a little tough to navigate that kind of thing as well.
So when it comes to messenger platforms, I think what you have to evaluate is how much time do you want to dedicate to that? I
mhm.
still have family abroad and I still communicate with them via WhatsApp, but I don't do it all the time. And I don't do it every minute of my day.
Right.
I have it on my computer and I set it up on my computer, the
Mhm.
WhatsApp app essentially, and I check it twice a day. And that's it. They
Mhm.
know that if they want to get a hold of me, they're going to have to make an effort. And if it's super urgent, I mean, somebody will contact you. They will
Right.
find a way somehow, some way. I think we have
Yeah.
accepted this default that, oh, I have to be available all the time. And what if there's an emergency? Those are like 2 very common
Yeah.
reasons that people give.
Hmm.
But the reality is that if there's an emergency and somebody needs to contact you, they're going to find a way to contact you.
Right.
Like
Right.
they're going to call you, they're going to call your friends, they're going to call your parents, they're going to call, the people that are around you. They're going to call your boss if you're at work and they
Mhm.
know that you're at work because it's an emergency, right? Like if
Mhm.
somebody's dying and you need to know, they will find a way to contact you. But the question is, do you want to be available 24/7?
Right.
So creating that little boundary is very important, and it's just an idea of, hey, do I want to check it all the time, or can I relegate this task to maybe twice or whatever? When it comes to the voice to text, and yes, it is more convenient, what I have found is that, if you really want those features, then you may need a little bit more of a smarter device. Like the cat
Mhm.
s22 has the ability to have Google voice to text, and you can put whatever system in there, whatever language. The Sunbeam F1 Pro actually also has that ability to do two languages. So you can set up
Oh, cool.
Spanish and English. So if you need that, but it's only text message, it would not be on WhatsApp or like any other
Yeah.
smarter apps.
Mm,
So
Very cool. Thanks.
awesome. Jose, we have a listener question that came in from our Instagram. The podcast and the newsletter are on Instagram at Scroll Sanity for folks who want to connect with us there. This question is from Kendra, and we'd love to get your thoughts on this, Jose, given you've been in the dumb phone universe a little bit longer than we have. Kendra says, I've been feeling overwhelmed by constant notifications and social media scrolling. It's definitely impacting my productivity and even my sleep. I'm interested in digital minimalism as a solution, but honestly, scared not to have my iPhone.
yes, that is very real. And a lot of people are going to have different solutions to that. I mean, I will have to understand a little bit more about Kendra's lifestyle desires. Like, does she want to have a desire to change her lifestyle completely? And I understand that she's scared to not have her iPhone for whatever reason. A simple solution is to start and reset from the beginning. So you do a factory reset and you
Mm,
set up your iPhone again as a phone. Don't log in to your app store. Don't download any apps.
Oh,
Just start from a clean slate as if it was like a brand new phone, and you just use it as a phone. You still have your iPhone, you still have that ability,
yes.
and then you do that. A second step, less drastic, of course, will be like, okay, I'm not gonna do that, Jose, because I don't want to lose my messages, whatever, pictures, yada yada yada, and I don't want to back it up. Okay, fine. Then find a hack, find a solution in between. Give your screen time passcode to a friend or a family member, right? Or like let them set it up. So you set up your limits. You say, hey, I want to use screens for this amount of time, Instagram for 30 minutes. And then once the screen time comes, you did not set up the passcode, somebody else did. That's friction right there that will allow you to, embrace a little bit more of digital minimalism because you are not the controller of overriding your desire.
Right.
Somebody else is.
Yes.
Mel, you want to take this one?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, what advice do you have for someone who's feel scratch that, we just answered that question. One question that we've been talking about a little bit is how do you handle replacing your smartphone with other technology? So, like, how many gadgets is too many? Because obviously, in a smartphone, you have a camera, you have microphone, you have, everything. And so, how many other gadgets do you need to kind of replace that one smartphone?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that that's a good question because a lot of people think that they're going to be back in the 90s carrying so many
Right.
things in technology. But one of the very good things about technology nowadays is that it has shrunk, right? Before we used to have tons of. So when it comes to that question and how many gadgets are too many, I think a lot of people have forgotten that we're not in the 90s anymore. So you're not carrying really big things. You could carry three or four gadgets and they all may fit in your purse if you're a woman, or your sling bag, or whatever you want to call it, because they have shrunk. So for example, like a GoPro is not your massive camera anymore, or an instant
Mhm.
360, for camera purposes, is super small nowadays. So you can carry three or four things that are as big as an iPhone, and still have that ability to still check. I have seen, like a MP3 player that is like super tiny. It's like a little square. I call the
Right.
Mighty Vibe, and it has like, or even a SanDisk clip. That one is so small. So three or four things that are maybe really useful for directions, for, having the ability to
Mhm.
connect to music and phone, and then a camera, you can literally fit all of those within the same size of an iPhone. So it's
Mhm.
not like, oh, you're carrying all of these massive things anymore.
Mm.
It's just a matter of like how much you want to spend. Are these gadgets really useful to your life? And how much you want to carry? I carry my Sunbeam F1 and my light phone, and that's it. I think the only other thing that I carry with me is my wallet, but that's about it. I have a camera there, I have podcasts, I have calls and text, and that's what my lifestyle integrates now. But let's say you want something else, a GPS or whatever, for whatever reason, there's small ones nowadays. You don't have to get a
Right.
big GPS anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jose, I think for me, I've been looking at it through this lens of digital intentionalism, right? Like there's a flashlight on your phone, there's a camera on your phone, there's music on your phone, but everything else is on your phone, right? Those push
Right.
notifications, the doom scrolling, the maybe that digital intimacy or parasocial relationships that you're trying to avoid. So, I've embraced this idea of the everyday carry. I have a little, as you said, a sling bag that has my iPad, my Steam Deck for gaming, my notebook, a little flashlight. And as you said, these things are not that much bigger than a phone. So yes, it's maybe 2 pounds versus a couple ounces, but certainly from a cost perspective, I got all of those items for less than what one smartphone costs. So,
Right.
and when I use the flashlight, I'm just using the flashlight. I don't run the risk of opening
Right.
Instagram or whatever the case may be. So thank you so much for sharing all that. I think that's really, really good advice.
Yeah, and I think on my end, like, it's been 2 months since I've had the dumb phone, and I didn't wanna jump into just, like, buying a bunch of gadgets because immediately I was like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna need a music player, I'm gonna need this." And I was like, "Let me just use the iPhone as my additional device. I can listen to music on there sometimes or use it as my camera." And that's what I've been doing, like, now I've been traveling, and I'm like, I wanna just feel it out, like, how is this working for me? I have a sense it's not great. Just having used my smartphone more in the last week than I have in the past 2 months, and I'm like, "Okay, maybe I do wanna think about getting a music player because I like listening to music on the airplane." But having, now on the airplane, I can be connected to to the internet. So now I'm listening to music on my smartphone on the airplane, and I'm also, like, on WhatsApp, and I'm also and I'm like, "Wow, whoa, whoa, whoa," So I'm taking it slow and figuring out what kind of replacements I wanna make, and we'll see how it goes.
Jose, as we were winding down with our time with you, I'm curious again for folks who are looking to jump into the digital minimalism pool. What are some of your favorite resources for anyone who's interested in learning more about the digital minimalism movement? Books, articles, things that you think, hey, here's a great place to start if you're looking to join this movement.
I actually am going to start by saying that the work that you need to do in order to embrace digital minimalism is actually not tech related, but emotional related. So,
Mhm.
somebody that has good regulation of their emotions and that has a good plan for their life will find this content easier to implement. But if you have had, again, history of addiction, or you have had maybe trauma in your past and
Mhm.
that is unaddressed, the reality is that trying to get rid of your phone is going to be a toxic relationship because you're going to come back and forth between it. But somebody who has, more emotional regulation. So, one book that I definitely recommend is emotional agility. So, to deal with that, understand how can we be emotionally agile in this world nowadays, right? How to react, how to respond. There's a lot of concepts in that book for sure that have helped me personally. Another one to address the emotions is a more popular book called What Happened to You. It talks about the history of trauma, and like to think about your life from what happened to you, not what's wrong with you, but what
Right.
happened to you. That's the question that originates. And now from a more like tech perspective, like getting into the books, digital minimalism is a good one, of course, from Cal Newport. And then you have Stolen Focus from Johan Hari. That's another good book. And honestly, a lot of them just kind of deal with that. The last one that I would say is unrelated, but it's kind of related to digital minimalism because digital minimalism is about being intentional with the purchases that we make, and also, understanding like how they take our time and attention. but like the psychology of money, how you think about money, it's very important from
Yes,
Morgan Housel, because that allows you to think, okay, am I using my money well? How am I responding to these things? Why am I spending $1,000 on a new iPhone every year? What is it that brings me to do that from a psychological perspective? So those are some resources that you can look into. And of course, there are other books out there, but those are the first ones that come to mind. Regulate your emotions first, understand how the tech works, and also see how finances is intertwined with that.
Awesome.
that
Wow.
makes so much sense.
Yeah, what an amazing list of resources. We'll absolutely link to all of those different resources in the show notes. And we're also going to link to Jose's book, Low Tech Life, because that's another great resource that he didn't mention because he's too modest, but it's certainly something that folks should take a look at. Jose, thank you so much for giving us all of your time. Again, folks who want to connect with Jose can find the Moving Offline newsletter on Substack, book Low Tech Life, and Jose's YouTube channel for dumb phone reviews.
Yes, the Jose, thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your expertise with us. We
Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
having me, and hopefully you guys continue to succeed and spread a good message that allows people to get back to their lives.
Awesome. And we'll have to have you back for sure. Carmela, before we wrap up, you mentioned at the top of the show, your most recent Substack post. I've already read it. I think it's amazing. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about what's new on Substack?
Sure. Doing my best to keep up with my newsletter about once a week. And my most recent post is about travel and how to navigate having more access to my smartphone. And one thing I have noticed is using my dumb phone has given me more ability to notice what's happening when I'm using my smartphone. And I'm also just noticing how much more everybody else is using their smartphone when I'm
Oh,
out in
yeah.
the world and out at the airport and whatever. It's a little bit jarring and it feels a little lonely, but it's interesting. I feel like an anthropologist a little bit. So that's what I wrote about this week.
Awesome. Well, thank you again to Jose Briones for being on the show this week. And thank you to all of you, our listeners, for tuning in to the second episode of the Scroll Sanity Podcast. This interview we just conducted with Jose was the first of many new exciting things we'll be rolling out on future episodes. So make sure you're subscribed so you never miss a minute. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will catch you on the next one. Thanks, Carmela.
See you next time.